Hello everyone, Alistair Gold here. Merry Christmas. Let's start with that. Hope you all had a wonderful Christmas day. Boxing Day was interesting. Let's start off with the positives. It was lovely to be able to go to a Premier League match. Just that kind of excitement, that feeling of making my way, especially to an away game. I love going to Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, don't get me wrong, but making your way on an away trip, it's very cool. It's a bit chilly, and the train strikes didn't help, but got there in the end. Had a really nice kind of half-hour walk from the nearest tube stop with various Spurs fans talking away. And I got to the stadium, met two very nice people from Nashville, which I've said before is one of my favourite places in America. When I went there on Spurs pre-season tour a few years back. So all of that was really exciting. Having Tottenham Hotspur back, whether you love them or loathe them, it was good to have that kind of routine back in life again after this weird and never before had kind of long winter break. But then I guess Tottenham Hotspur happened. It's just mad. It's like 6 weeks on. Same Tottenham Hotspur. It really is. Nothing has changed. Look, I don't want to go into this kind of dark hole of, woe is me or woe is Tottenham Hotspur, it's the worst thing in the world, because I do have to ground it with the fact that, Brentford have played very well against a lot of big teams. They've beaten Man City, they beat Man United, they drew against Chelsea and probably should have won that game. So, look, it's not like Spurs were rocking up at some kind of relegation fodder and putting an absolutely awful performance. It was just more the fact that all of the good things and the bad things from pre-World Cup breaks were still there. And it looked like nothing had been kind of worked on or fixed. Watch the, if you can, or if you want to, watch the press conference back. Watch at the start as I start to ask Conte about the... because it's 9 games in a row that Spurs have now conceded the first goal. As I start to ask him about that, honestly, he has a look at, kind of looks like the way I do when I have to start these videos. He grimaces, he laughs. Before he'd even answered the question, he's like almost, I think he put his kind of hands through his hair as if he's clearly at a bit of a loose end at what to do with this. It's just like Jekyll and Hyde. Honestly, the first half, they kind of started... always seems to be the pattern. They started quite brightly. And it kind of almost lulls you into this false sense of, okay, they're trying to get up the pitch, they're pressing. And they do this every time in like the first probably 5 minutes. And then just Brentford, honestly, every time they attacked in that first half looked like they could score. And it just... Like I say, 9 games in a row they've conceded first. 6 in the Premier League they've conceded first in a row. Yet somehow they kind of, I wouldn't say they saved the day because they didn't win it, but they find a way back with 2 really top draw goals from Harry Kane and Pierre-Emile. It's such a weird club. If you can imagine how difficult it is to support them as a fan, imagine what it's like writing about them. Honestly, you're ripping up what you're writing as you go because it's just constantly changing. Although I guess they're so predictable now in the way they go. Maybe I could write it pre-game. That'd probably be the one time it changes. And I think what's disappointing for me was the fact that Conte has had, 6 weeks on the training pitches at Hotspur Way, in the meeting rooms at the training complex, to really drill down into, I guess, the psychological aspect and organisation lapses that are causing these goals to go in the first halves. But nothing changed. Absolutely nothing changed yesterday. Don't worry, this isn't going to be a me constantly whinging video. Although some of you might find that cathartic, I don't know. But there are good elements and there's good things to talk about, of course. This is the weird nature of Tottenham right now, is that there are good things to talk about, but there's also very, very poor things to talk about. And the way certain things went as well. And I think Brentford, yeah, that's what frustrated me really, is that Conte is a man known for his preparation of the team. And we've always said this, and it's there on paper to see that whenever Spurs have had a kind of a period of time to work ahead of a game, at least a full week, they've looked better for it and they've gone into the game with a real plan and looked like they knew what they were doing. 6 weeks, maybe that was too much because they just did not look that way. Brentford looked far better prepared. The only thing I would say in the defence of Tottenham in that's a very small defence, a bit like Tottenham's yesterday, not a lot of defence. But Brentford, unless I'm mistaken, probably had a longer period of time to work with the bulk of their players ahead of the game, whereas obviously Spurs would have had, even Ivan Perisic, absolute machine. He was playing for Croatia a week before in the third playoff match. Obviously, they didn't have Hugo Lloris in goal. Spurs. They didn't have Christian Romero in the back line. Harry Kane and Eric Dyer only came back in the week. So obviously they had certain players, and obviously missing Bentancur suspended. But again, I don't want to give him excuses. That sounded like I was going down the excuse route. It's not. I'm just saying, I guess in the preparation, if I'm Conte, I would maybe say that Brentford had a little bit more time with their starting 11 that they were going to play with to really, really drill them for the game. But what Spurs had and what Spurs, they really, at the end of the match yesterday, despite everything I was saying about Brentford playing so well in all their previous games and being an absolute nightmare to play for teams, Spurs should have won that game, and they didn't. Oh my goodness, it's one of those where I think what we were 60. I'm trying to think when this second goal went in. It was before the hour mark, wasn't it? And all of the kind of excitement at having Tottenham back, at having the Premier League back, it just dissipated. It was certainly for me, not especially for me, but certainly for me, and I'm sure all those fans I could see across the other side of the ground. I'm just thinking, what do I write now? What do I write about this defeat? And little did I know that, of course, Spurs would absolutely do what they do and find character and find spirit. But as, you're going to get with these Conte quotes I'm going to give you in a bit, they shouldn't have to find that in the second half. I likened them in the piece I wrote after the game to Frankenstein's monster. They kind of lie there lifeless. And it just takes this bolt of lightning, which obviously in this case is a goal or two going in, and as suddenly they burst to life and they, lurch about the pitch and find their way back with some real strength. It's just such a strange team. Just weird. Honestly, I was sitting kind of thinking about the things I was going to talk about today in this video, and honestly, it hurts your brain trying to think about Tottenham Hotspur sometimes, what's going to happen. And I can see, before I started, people getting very angry on social media about a transfer window that hasn't even come yet. And I think a lot of that frustration is also born out of what you would have watched yesterday, and I completely understand that as well. But this was the weird thing. First half, Brentford just looked threatening every time they went forward, had a few kind of missed chances they'd done better with that maybe the game could have even been out of sight. Second half, Brentford barely had a sniff at Spurs' goal. I think there was the one that, I can't remember who it was it Mbeumo? Definitely dived. But I think Thomas Frank said afterwards he's got no issue with that decision, but actually had the player taken another touch and got round, that could have been a killer goal as well. But other than that, Spurs absolutely dominated. Honestly, they were the ones that were testing the Brentford keepers at Raya, and really should have won it. And Brentford, everything that was good about Brentford in the first half kind of disappeared in the second because Spurs played well. I suppose. So I wouldn't say the whole. Maybe the last half hour is probably a more accurate kind of summation of that. And obviously, you had the goals from Højbjerg or Kane and Højbjerg, but you also had Kane hitting the crossbar. Sonny had a few efforts that the keeper saved as well. A few times they got into good positions that they should have done better with Spurs as well. Kind of, Conte praised their attacking yesterday. I would actually say I wasn't as impressed with their attacking yesterday. They got two lovely goals, but I didn't actually think attacking-wise they were quite as fluid as they really should be. But here's some little stats for you. Spurs had 61% of the possession, Brentford 39%. Spurs had 16 shots on target to Brentford's 9, and Spurs had 8 of those shots on target to Brentford's 5. Tottenham Hotspur. I mean, for Conte, he's got his wife Elisabetta and daughter Vittoria back with him in England at the moment for the festive period. Presumably it's because Vittoria's off school. But he's got the same old Tottenham Hotspur. It might be different behind the scenes, but Tottenham Hotspur very much the same. And what's weird, I was thinking about this last season. The weird thing that we were kind of talking about, the repetitive nature that I had to bring into these videos. Obviously, it was win-loss, 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 wasn't it, for quite a long period. It's almost like now it's zoomed in. So rather than win-loss in games, it's almost like 45 minutes, like losing the first half, winning the second half. It's so strange. Honestly, it's like night and day, first half to second half. And I don't get the psychology behind it. I don't understand where it's coming from, because surely as a team you have this collective desire to end a pattern like that. I can almost understand maybe the win-loss, because it's over a whole game and maybe there's slightly less control of it. But in a first half, you can control the way you come out. You're at your freshest. You should be able to focus and concentrate absolutely at your peak. So I don't understand it. And honestly, like I say, look at the press conference when I asked. I asked 2 questions. The first question was something like, we're now, yet another game where you've had to come back from behind. It's like, how do you sum this up this many times after this many times it's happening? And he grimaced, he laughed, he put his hand to his head, and this is what he came out with. One thing I've noticed with Conte, he's started to say quite a lot, and this has never happened to me before, or happened in my career, or stuff like that. That's Tottenham Hotspur for you. Tottenham Hotspur will bring you a lot of unwanted firsts. That's what they do. I'm sure there's many managers who have never had anything happen to them in their careers before they went to Tottenham. So Conte is probably a man that's used to mostly winning. I think, was it last year or at some point last season, he had losing 3 in a row at home, was it? I think he'd never had his career. I'm sure there was another one. And now it's, conceding the first goal in 9 games in a row, which is absolutely ridiculous, especially for someone that is so prides themselves on the defence. So this is what he said in answer to that question. I'm going to try and read it quite quickly because he went on a bit of a monologue. I think for the people that today watched the game, but this is not the first time they've watched Tottenham, it was another exciting game. On one side, I have to be happy for the reaction, for the way we played in the second half of the game. But not only the way we scored 2 goals, but the energy, the desire, the intensity that we played. When you play in this way, for sure you create a lot of problems for your opponent. On this side, I'm happy. In the other side, this is 9 games in a row that we conceded the first goal. This is not positive, because understand we have great character, understand that we have a great reaction, understand that we believe in ourselves, but at the same time it's important to be stable for a team that wants to try and stay in a good position in the table. To concede for many games the first goal, or also 2 goals, we have to make good reflections and try to find a solution. For me, this is the first time that happened, this type of situation, to concede the first goal 9 times in a row. The first goal, and he started to laugh to your opponent. But at the same time, it's the first time to have this fantastic reaction of these players, I think he's saying, in his career. They show great character, great desire, but we have to put these from the start. In our mind, it was so. We wanted to start in this way. Then we conceded a goal, and then we conceded another goal from a set piece. Against a team that I want to underline also is not an easy game. Brentford, don't forget they have beaten this season important teams like City, United, Chelsea. They drew at home, but maybe they deserve much more. It's not easy to play against Brentford because we're talking about a physical team. When you go to press them, they play a long ball, and Tony is really good to keep the ball and to play with the other striker. Every set piece in every zone of the pitch, they put this ball into the box. They're physically strong, and it's not an easy game. I want to underline this, but at the end, we could win, and it's okay. I mean, the set piece one is an interesting one as well. Is that Spurs with Gianni Vio have become dangerous from set pieces, but they almost need the negative version of Gianni Vio, who purely concentrates on defensive set pieces. They must have someone in the camp that concentrates on that, but they are conceding from set pieces. And I've seen sometimes people on Twitter go, "Oh, this set piece coach is rubbish." But it's like, well, no, he's purely attacking. That's all he does. And that definitely has made a vast difference. But I don't understand. Well, we'll come on to centre-backs and stuff like that. But, Kulusevski was not happy after the game as well. He did a little bit for Spurs play. I'll read that out, actually, because he's very honest. I love interviewing or listening to interviews with Dejan Kulusevski because he just says what he thinks. He doesn't seem to have much of a filter. I watched this podcast that he was on. Obviously, it was subtitles. I think it was a Swedish one. He's so good. He really is. He just says what's on his mind. So here's what he said after the game. First half was very bad. We didn't feel ready and lost every second ball. It's quite interesting. We didn't feel ready. That's not a good sign whatsoever. We didn't do anything with the ball, so we were very disappointed with the game. It's not okay. You feel that as a player. As soon as you get the first goal, you feel that you're going to win. And we did. We went very, very close. I thought we were going to win, and I was watching the clock the whole time because I knew we had a lot of time to score. Unfortunately, we did not. But the big problem is not the second half, it's the first half. We have to improve. It's not okay to start games like this. If we want to be a big team, then we need to start playing from the first minute. It's not enough with words. We have to do it on the pitch. And he was asked, how do you change it? He said, honestly, if I knew, I would tell everybody, but I don't know. We have to figure it out as a team, everybody together. Of course, there's a lot of frustration in the dressing room. We didn't expect this. We worked so hard to not play like this. So when you work hard, you want to see the results. But today we didn't do that. There's another game against Villa soon. So we will be prepared because the first game is always the most difficult after such a break. I mean, that's one side to it. There were some people I was talking to ahead of the game that were like, it's almost is like the first game of a new season. You don't know which way it could go. There's a lot of unknowns. There's a lot of people at different levels of fitness. So there is that. But it's the same for both sides. So, for me, it's just all focus really was on the defence. And also, not just the defenders, I think, but those covering the defence and those who had to play the supporting role with the defence as well. Because like I say, keeping with the Christmas tradition or theme, Conte wants a Scrooge-like defence. He does. That's what his kind of teams are built on. He'll be hating the fact that his defence is as generous as they come. They've conceded so many goals. I don't know if I've got I've got it for the Premier League here. I normally have it up here somewhere. There we are. Conceded 23 goals this season. Spurs defence, which in the Premier League, nobody else in the top 7 has conceded as many. I didn't realise Fulham have gone up to 8th. That's interesting. I think I looked at the Premier League table a little bit earlier yesterday, so I didn't see Fulham were up in 8th. They're the only ones in the top 9 that have got a worse goal difference than Spurs. So have got conceded more than Spurs. It's only because Spurs have scored 33, which is better than all bar City and Arsenal. That Spurs, goal difference is 10. It's just a mad team. Honestly, it's such a mad team. And this was the thing, Japhet Tanganga came into the team yesterday. 23 years old, first Premier League game in 11 months. It was a tough game to throw him into. Very difficult game. It's one of those with hindsight, of course, you'll look back and say Antonio that was a tough one for him. I was trying to work out ahead of it the logic behind it because obviously he's only played 17 minutes this season. That was against Marseille in the Champions League. He's had a lot of problems with his knee over this 2022. But the other day I did see an interview ahead of the game where Conte was made a big point about saying how he hoped he was finally over these issues. He's very versatile and he has played well in big games before, Japhet, against the bigger clubs. I remember Mourinho chucking him in against Liverpool and him doing very well in his Premier League debut. But it was I think the logic behind it, from what I could understand, was that in the 3 friendlies ahead of it against Motherwell, Peterborough Under-21s and Nice, Tanganga had played on the right at the back 3. Davinson Sanchez had been playing in the middle, in the Dyer role, before he'd come back, and then Longley, Charlie Sayers in the first game against Motherwell, and then Longley in the next 2. So I guess there was a continuity of Tanganga having played 3 games in a row in that position, and maybe could have come straight in with that logic. There's maybe the thinking that Tanganga perhaps could offer a little bit more in getting up there and supporting Matt Doherty. Maybe got that little bit more kind of drive, maybe when he runs down, when he does get his head down. Tanganga, perhaps. It didn't work. It didn't work. The reality was completely different. Came up against Ivan Toney, and it was like, it's cliche, but it was kind of like men against boys, wasn't it? He absolutely tore him apart. He was chasing shadows the whole time. And I certainly do not fall in the Tanganga's rubbish kind of crew whatsoever. I think he's a young player. He's 23 years old. Like I say, hasn't played a Premier League game in 11 months. He's going to be as rusty as anything. My question would be more, was it right to start him in that game? And ironically, Davinson Sanchez, I actually felt as soon as he came in, the defence tightened up. He played well going back, but he also actually contributed going forward. I think he had quite a powerful shot that the keeper had to hold. So, yeah, it was a decision that just didn't work at all. You know, Tony has been one of the best players or strikers in the Premier League this season. He obviously, there's off the field issues going on right now, and we await to see kind of what happens with that. But in terms of on the pitch, you know, he is an absolute handful, because he not only is a willing runner, so he'll get into the box whenever Brentford are in possession, but also when they want to hit it long, he's always there for them. He holds the ball up well. And yeah, Tanganga just really, really struggled to deal with him. For me, Tanganga is desperate need of a loan. He needs to go away to, whether it's a club abroad or whether it's a team in the Premier League, even maybe a high-level championship team. I think he just needs to play a whole season. I just don't think he's had that in his career yet. He needs to understand, like Skippy when he went to Norwich, I think he needs to understand and learn from what playing week in, week out does for you. And it shapes you as a player, it shapes your focus, shapes your concentration. I do feel for him. He's just been a player that injuries have played their part as well, but I feel he's always coming in and out of a team and trying to respond and maybe play slightly out of or in different positions at times. He looked every inch a player that has not played for a long, long time yesterday. And it's such a chalk and cheese to this. When you think back to the start of last season, we started so well. Played against Man City, didn't he? And he was absolute man of the match under Nuno. And then it kind of all started to go a bit pear-shaped, and he got sent off against Palace, and he just hasn't really ever got back to where he was. But yeah, look, don't get me wrong, it wasn't just about young players. It was the older heads. I felt defensively were shaky. Dyer and Longley. Longley definitely contributed going forward, but I felt defensively he had some really shaky moments. I mean, you know, we talk about Ivan Toney, but just talk about that second goal. Eric Dyer. I was really hopeful that, I think I'd said in the past that Eric Dyer, for me, when Spurs had the break between games and had that little bit of extra time to prepare, I felt Eric Dyer was really much more mentally switched on. It was, for me, it was during that period where Spurs had a game every 2-3 days or 3-4 days. That, for me, was when he looked really, really shaky and error-prone, mentally fatigued, maybe, I don't know, whatever you want to call it. And so I was quite hopeful that he would come back, having only played, 33 minutes at the World Cup, and I thought he'd be really, really focused. He wasn't. He looked quite nervy, absolutely summed up by the wild attempt at a clearance that he sliced somehow behind him. And it wasn't even like he was near the touchline. He was outside his own box, and he kind of sliced it behind him and over his head. And obviously that led to the corner. flicked on, and Longley absolutely lost Tony, who just tapped the ball into the net. Yeah, and I mean the first goal, that was a complete mess as well. Someone gave it away up the pitch. Was it Sonny? I'm trying to remember now. I can't remember who gave it away. Someone gave it away up the pitch. Brentford broke away. And there were just a catalogue of errors. So I think some people are giving Forster stick for it. I think that's quite harsh. I thought in the moment, and I went back and watched the replays, and I still maintain with that. So Matthias Jensen's shot deflects off Longley, and kind of Force has to make a bit of a reaction save, and he can kind of adjust his body, maybe just gets a hand to it, but unfortunately it falls out right into the path of Vitaly Janelt. And then I feel that became someone else's fault, really, because you look at the positioning of both Basuma and Højbjerg, Janelt just runs in between them. Honestly, how either of them didn't track that run, that's one that I think when they're looking today at Hotspur Way, trust me, they will not be getting days off after that performance. They'll be looking at that and they'll be analysing how did Janelt get... Both goals were unmarked players scoring, but how did he make a run from outside the box straight into the centre to be in a position to tap home a loose ball from, 3 yards out? That, for me, was all on either Basuma or Højbjerg had to communicate and track him. I mean, Højbjerg maybe you could say was behind him, so maybe you didn't see him. But Basuma's facing him, and it's poor. It's so poor. And yeah, from what I understand, Conte was livid with defending. Wasn't afterwards, kind of was quite calm and measured afterwards, but behind the scenes, I understand he was pretty livid with it all. So we come to my next question, one which I think upsets a few people. Not my question, I think, but the answer. So I said to Antonio Conte, so you've changed up the back three. You know, you've used different faces. You've used different players. I mean, today you even had a different goalkeeper. Obviously, Hugo Lloris was back, but his birthday boy, Hugo Lloris, was it 36? He was on the bench. It was very strange before the match watching Hugo Lloris warming up like Fraser Forster. Normally you see Lloris in the goal when it's Forster and Brandon Austin, as it was yesterday, kind of peppering long balls at him to try and catch the crosses, but it was the other way around. But yeah. So I said to him, you know, you've changed everyone in there. Are you now at a point where you're kind of thinking to yourself, maybe I need a new centre-back? Because I know that is definitely, it was one of the positions that they can find an upgrade, they will. But, so I thought I'll ask him. And his answer, yeah, I think it produced a little bit of bewilderment. So I asked him, yes, do you want a new centre-back there in a January transfer window? No. About the defenders, I think now we've recovered also Japhet Tanganga. It was his first game of the season. He struggled a lot with his knee. You know now that he needs a bit of time to grow into the game, but I'm pleased for him to play a game today. Then at central defender, I think we're good. We have to continue to work. Cuti Romero comes back tomorrow, so that's today, into the training session. I repeat, in one side I'm a bit disappointed this season because we've conceded many goals. In the other side, I think that we're scoring many goals, creating chances, and to attack with many players. So, yeah, I put that out as the press conference was going. People not happy because obviously when you've seen another defensive performance like that and conceded 9 games in a row first, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. Yes, you know, you could really do with another quality centre-back option to go in there, especially when the others are making mistakes. There's 2 sides to it. There's 3. First off, he could mean it. Maybe he doesn't want another centre-back. Secondly, he maybe just feels he has to say that, you know, because if he comes out and says, yeah, I need another centre-back, he's essentially saying, you lot are rubbish. Some might suggest that that's the kind of wake-up call they might need. And then the third option, or the third side to it, of course, is that it's a financial thing. Is that, you know, you don't tell everyone what you need to buy because selling clubs will then whack up their price because they think, oh, we know they're desperate for a new centre-back. So there is that side to it. And look, Romero coming back, a very, very confident Romero is going to add a lot. I'm hoping we see a different Romero to the one post-injury pre-World Cup. I think as that tournament went on, he got better and better and better. And he's a guy who's just won the World Cup. He's going to be on cloud nine. You know, if you ever want to see a player with full confidence, it should be Christian Romero coming back. So hopefully, you know, Spurs get the very best of him now. And he will make a big difference. You know, obviously, you take Tanganga out outside yesterday, you put Romero in. There's probably that first half doesn't quite go the same way it did. Although, obviously, Romero has been involved in some of those games where Spurs have gone behind first. But yeah, it's no secret that if Spurs could find a centre-back on the market that is an improvement on what they have in their squad, they would go for it. And Tanganga, like I say, would probably be the one to head out on loan, or if they were to get a good deal, you know, sell him. But I'd imagine in the market as it is, probably a loan is more likely. Maybe with an option to buy, perhaps. But like I say, I'd like to see him just go out on loan and then see where you're at, you know, let's say in the summer. Even if he plays a full second half of the season somewhere, I think you have a very different Japhet Tanganga. And I think people look at it a little bit differently. Because we, myself included, we judge players based on what we see. Without maybe understanding fully what it's like to be that player coming in and out and obviously having the injuries as well. So, yeah, I think he needs to look at it. And because if Conte decides that they truly don't need another centre-back or they don't need any new defenders, it's on him. It is. It's as simple as it is. This is why I was kind of slightly, not surprised, because I think I maybe expected him to not admit that he wanted another defender. But if he says that they don't need another one, and if that was to be what he told the club, then he needs to fix that defence. That's his problem. He's said he wants to work with those players and he thinks they're good enough. So then it comes down to their preparation, organisation, and what he does with them. Yes, I know that all you can do essentially is send them out there, and then what they do next is down to them. But, you know, if you're one of the world's top coaches, you should be able to sort that out, really. So, yeah, that's the defence. I did think they missed Bentancur, having that little bit of composure in the middle of the pitch. Basuma got better as the game wore on. Second half, he was using the ball very well, twisting and turning, doing little pirouettes and stuff. Højbjerg again, that first half, honestly, he was like he had his shoelaces tied together at some points early on. He was really kind of clumsy in what he was doing. But as the game wore on, I thought he got better and better, and of course scored an absolutely lovely goal. Finished with one like Harry Kane would be very proud to call his own. Nice touch and finish. I think that's 5 for him now this season, and 4 assists. So yeah, I don't think you can argue with his attacking output as a defensive midfielder. I think he's really come on leaps and bounds under Conte in that regard. Actually, as I mentioned, Harry Kane. Could talk about Harry Kane. He just got back to what he does best, didn't he? On yesterday. I think if any way you could imagine Harry Kane was going to respond to that penalty miss, it was to come back and score in the first available opportunity. First half, he was playing within himself. Thomas Frank said afterwards, he admitted afterwards that very much there was 3 game plans he had, or 3 elements to his game plan. One was to stop Harry Kane. One was to stop Spurs set pieces, and the other was to win the battles in the transitions, which they did all 3 of those in the first half. But it only worked for 65 minutes with Harry Kane because absolute doozy of a cross from Clement Longley. Brilliant cross. He's done a few of those as well, but it was such a lovely delivery. Even Thomas Frank said afterwards, it's like you can barely defend against that. It's such a good cross. And then Kane rose. It's a bit like those when you see Ronaldo kind of leap high. It was one of those kind of leapt like a salmon headers, perfectly planted into the far corner. And it really did shift the momentum. The whole game shifted in that moment. It was such a kind of proof that they could score. It's like almost they'd forgotten they could do it. It was a lovely, lovely goal. And he could have had a second one. He really, I think it was another long leg cross. He chucked himself in between a defender and the goalkeeper. Could have hurt himself, but he got his head to it, and the ball just kind of arced over and hit the crossbar, and it fell, and it almost, I think it hit a Brentford defender, so it could have trickled back over the line, but then another defender cleared it. But yeah, from that moment on, Kane kind of woke up, as it were. It was almost like the light switch moment that he needed. Because it was a tough day for him. Of course it is. The Brentford fans singing, you let your country down. That was going around the ground. Spurs fans were brilliant with him, of course. Before kick-off, they were singing, Harry Kane, it's one of our own and all of this. And you could see that meant something to him. After the final whistle, he went over and had a little moment kind of by himself. The other players came, but he was quite a way ahead. He went over and applauded them. Clearly something that struck a chord with him. He was captain for the day, of course, with Lloris on the bench. I've said this before, but nobody would be hurting more than Harry Kane after that penalty. He didn't need the torrent of abuse he got on social media. He didn't need the nasty things that people were sending him through the post and all this sort of stuff that I mentioned last week. He didn't need any of that to remind him kind of what happened. And just what, I guess, kind of an aberration it was for someone who's normally just so clinical in front of goal. He knows that it was just a moment that would not normally happen to him. And he obviously took a few days to rest and relax, kind of get his head straight, I guess. Not head straight, but processing, I think is probably the best way to put it. Processing everything that happened out there in Qatar for him. And then, like I say in the last video, he came back early in the week for some fitness testy type stuff, and then he surprised the players at halftime in the Nice game. Came and saw them, and then he was back in training on the Thursday. So Thursday, Friday, where are we at? I'm losing track with Boxing Day. Well, we're Tuesday now, aren't we? Yeah. So Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So 4 days of training, and then obviously Monday back to matches, or the match. Yeah, I did think it took him a bit of time to warm up, but, his goal tally now is ridiculous. 13 goals in 16 games. He's now just 4 off Jimmy Greaves' 266 for Spurs. It also, that goal against Brentford, remarkable stat, means that he's now scored against all 32 teams he's faced in the Premier League. It's just incredible. There's no team that has lined up against Harry Kane, or no club that has lined up against Harry Kane in the Premier League and have been able to keep him out. In games they have, but he has at some point always got a goal against them, and that's incredible. And he also is a very festive Boxing Day man. He's scored in every single Premier League game he's played on Boxing Day, and this goal made him the first player in the competition history to score 10 goals on December the 26th. So there you go, a little bit of festive trivia for him. Got a Højbjerg quote about him as well. When he was asked about Kane, he said, "To underestimate his strength is a big mistake. He is a machine. He has the quality to be number one in the world. The biggest mistake you can make in football is to doubt Harry Kane." I like that. It's a good quote. It's absolutely right. It is. And I just really kind of now hope that he just takes it out on opposition defences and goalkeepers and just gets all that pain out by scoring a ridiculous amount of goals and getting back to the playmaking stuff he was doing as well for Spurs and England, obviously, at the World Cup. Conte said a fair bit about him. He was asked about the Brentford fans, chants and the abuse that he's clearly going to get at grounds whenever he goes to them now. The first penalty. I was wondering, can you imagine if the Spurs got a last-minute penalty yesterday to kind of decide the game? And to be honest, would probably still put my money on Harry Kane to score, and I'm not a betting man. But Conte said about Harry Kane, "Personally, about Harry, I have zero doubt about his quality, about his mentality, about the way he approached every game and every training session. For sure, for Harry, he's facing a strange situation because he played a really good World Cup. I think that also because he played a really good World Cup and the team played the quarter-final, then he missed his penalty, and it was a decisive penalty for England to drop them." I think he means obviously drop them out of the competition. "But you know very well football is this. You can have positive or negative moments. If you are strong mentally, if you're a top player, if you're a player of a big, big level, then there is a moment you have to put to one side a negative situation and move on from it. I think Harry did this. I repeat, we're talking about a really, really good player and especially a good person. For this reason, our fans and also the fans of other teams should every time clap him." I love the thinking there, Antonio, but I don't think we can ever see the Emirates applauding him. I don't think I can see Stamford Bridge rising to applaud Harry Kane. Actually, someone reminded me, I don't think I mentioned this in the video, that when I was talking about post big tournament England abuse, and I spoke about, I think, some Arsenal fans used the reasoning that they were really going for Harry Kane because Spurs fans did that with Saka. And I think I said at the time, I didn't remember. They were talking about a chant that Spurs fans sang. And I genuinely did not remember it. And then I think Guesty, who I do our podcast with, Golden Guest Talk Tottenham, if you haven't listened to it, he reminded me in the Mind Series game when Spurs played Arsenal in pre-season last summer. Yeah, it was last summer, wasn't it? It was Nuno time. That Spurs fans all applauded Saka. So it does happen. So yeah, Antonio Conte said it. I don't think it will ever see it, especially Harry Kane, because of the amount of goals I think he's scored against a lot of teams. And I think there's this element to it. And this is, we know the tribal nature of football. And I think Conte kind of touched on it. It's almost like when you've scored a lot of goals against, someone scored a lot of goals against your team, you just have this thing about them. You don't like them naturally. And he said, when he was talking about, he was asked about the Brentford fans and their chants, and he said the fans were scared because today he was playing for Tottenham, not for what happened for England. It's normal. The fans tried to create a problem, but only, I think, because he was playing for Tottenham and against their team. It's normal. In Italy, you don't know what happened. And he started to laugh because obviously Conte has been in a position, hadn't he, when was it when Baggio put his penalty over in the World Cup? I think Conte was in that team, and they had to then go back to Italy afterwards and obviously play their football. He was talking about Italy. He said, when they play national team together, they are the best. Then when they start together in the league, the fans find ways to disrupt the other players of the opponents, because in this moment, they are a player for the opponent, and they can hurt your team. No, it's not personal. In England, I think I've always found a fantastic atmosphere, a great education, and fans really polite. This impressed me a lot. He's always saying that. You can always sense that. I think he prefers English football a lot compared to Italian football. That's only the sense I get. Which also, when you hear about him kind of potentially maybe going back to Italy, I do think he sees it as, I don't want to say an inferior league, but I think Premier League is held up as the pinnacle. And I think he's one of these kind of managers that sees that in that way. Like I say, now it's a case of Kane taking that frustration out on defences. If he keeps going down this road, he is going to be the difference, I guess, probably between Spurs finishing in the top four and not, if he can continue to score the amount of goals he's getting at the moment. I mean, 13 and 16 is a terrific record so far. It's only because of Haaland obviously has scored so many, it's probably gone under the radar a bit. Thomas Frank was singing his praises as well, Kane, afterwards. He said that was the plan to stop him, but obviously he's just such a good player. There's not really too much you can do when he gets in a position like that. Right. I think that's pretty much the bulk of what I could say on the game. I'm trying to think of any players I've really missed out. I'll touch on Matt Doherty in a moment. I was a little bit disappointed with Matt Doherty, purely because he'd been so good in the friendlies. I know it's a different level, but he didn't really offer too much. I think defensively he did quite well. I saw a stat where he won most of his aerial duels, but going forward, for a guy that had scored 4 goals in 3 friendly games, yes, I know the opposition, but I still felt sharpness-wise, he could have contributed a lot more. Perisic, I thought, put in some dangerous balls. But, just fair play to him, I think, for getting straight back out there. But, yeah, I think it's time to talk about Conte and Tottenham, which just the more and more I think about it. And I wasn't at the press conference on Friday, but I saw the quotes, obviously, that came, and he said a little bit similar, I think, to Sky Sports yesterday, which for some reason it only seems to have come out today. I don't know why that's happened. About the transfer window, and it just takes me back to the moment, maybe even further back than the moment he signed for Spurs. Maybe the first time they had talks. I remember saying back then that it's just such a strange fit, Tottenham Hotspur and Antonio Conte, because they have very different views on a lot of things. Yeah, it was weird. I mean, I've got some more little quotes first for you. Because I think there were some quotes that I saw that It was in his Spurs play interview. It wasn't in his press conference interview, where I felt you could just feel the undercurrent of anger that he'd had towards players after the game that we didn't really get to know about, but also a kind of a message to everyone concerned. When he was talking about when they asked him about conceding first and all of this on his club interview, he said, "For this reason, I spoke to my other players because it's becoming usual, this type of situation. Okay, we were good to come back and at the end we deserved to win the game, but we have to try to improve. It's important to be stable. The team needs to be stable from the first moment of the game until the end. You know the difficulty of this league. In this moment, United, Chelsea and Liverpool stay out of a Champions League place. But for the history of these clubs and the potential of these clubs, you know they want to take a place in the Champions League. For this reason, we need to try to improve, to work very hard and to put in our mind the target to go to another level. I think that since my arrival, we have had a good step. For this reason, we took a place in the Champions League last season. Now it's important to continue to grow, and there is only one way, to work very hard and to have the desire to put yourself in another level." And I felt that those last words were as much a message to the club, the board, Daniel Levy, Fabio Paratici, whoever you want to chuck in there, as much as it was to the players. Have the desire to put yourself on another level. I mean, looking at the substitutions he made yesterday, I mean, it just summed up everything I think about how the way he views his squad. Only 2 substitutions. One was purely because Clement Longley had blood pouring down his face towards the end because he got an elbow in the face. Sanchez for Tanganga. Was it about the hour mark around then? And Davies came on for Longley with that blood coming down his face. 2 defenders, centre-backs as well, that he brought on. His attacking options were slim. He essentially only had Bryan Hill on the bench. He did have his top choice 3 out there, you'd probably say. Obviously, Harry Kane, Kulusevski. I thought Kulusevski wasn't quite as sharp as I expected. He had a few good moments. Definitely had some good moments. And I think Brentford was scared of him. He dribbled past them at will. But I would say what he did in the final third with the ball didn't always match. Obviously, he got the assist, albeit deflected, pass to Højbjerg. But I felt there were a few moments when he could have done a little bit better with the ball when he got into those moments. Sonny had a strange game. He had some kind of moments where I really felt he was driving at Brentford. He was going on really strong runs, but then didn't seem to know what to do at the end of it. He was really looked up for it. He was flying past players that were trying to tackle him, but then at the end he would maybe, a bit like I've criticised Lucas Moura for in the past, where he'd beat 2 or 3 men and then he'd just run into the next man. And obviously, you can't get away from the fact, and he admits this fully, that he's only scored in 1 Premier League match the whole season so far, and he's only scored in 1 Champions League game the whole season so far. And for a player of his incredible quality, for the Golden Boot winner, he admits himself it's not good enough. And yeah, it could be one of those where if he just gets 1 goal, it starts a trail. If he gets 1 great assist, it starts, because even the assists haven't really been racking up either. And with Sonny, it's either a goal or an assist. Yeah, obviously he's had his injury and he's had little things as well. He kind of needs to refine his kind of rhythm as well. But obviously pre-injury, it wasn't quite working for him as well. And the trouble was when you've got a front 3 who are your preferred front 3, but if they're not quite firing on all cylinders, you need to look at your bench and think, right, I've got game changers. And Conte looks at his bench and clearly thought, I don't have a single game changer on there. Lucas Moura, I was laughing at Bryan Hill there, and his absolute, it's like he's the invisible man. I wasn't laughing about what I'm about to say, which is Lucas Moura obviously had a real issue with this inflamed tendon, which has now been going on pretty much the whole season. Conte the other day, I saw in his press conference, looked quite concerned about it. Richarlison, obviously, as I said before, and I think Conte confirmed that the other day, not likely to be back till later next month, with his hamstring problem as well. So that left Bryan Hill on the bench. And it's almost like, you can just imagine Conte looking across his bench, like, okay, and Bryan Hill's like, hello, hello, hello. And Conte said, was it anyone? Anyone? It's like when a teacher asks a question in class and there's that one kid that always puts his hand up to answer and they're like, anyone else? Anyone else? Poor old Brian Hill. He looked really bright in the friendlies again. I know the opposition, but he did. He looked really bright again. It means nothing. Honestly, Brian Hill, I get the impression he could come off the bench in a Premier League game, score a hat-trick, and then not come on or be used at all in the next game by Antonio Conte. It's a little bit like he used to be with Steven Bergwijn. You just get the impression that he'll praise them. He'll say nice things about them. Not a chance that they will get on that pitch. Maybe that's part of the problem as well. I mean, this again, it's another thing where you can look at the politics of it. You could say that he just doesn't trust him. You could say that maybe in the back of his mind, I'm not accusing him of this, but maybe this could be a scenario where in the back of his mind, he's looking at it and thinking, if I bring on Brian Hill, this 21-year-old Spaniard, maybe the powers that be look at that and say, well, you clearly think he's good enough, you brought him on. Well, maybe we don't need another player to come in, kind of thing. I don't think seriously they would. But, we know he'd want some more ready-made replacement. We know he loves Richarlison because Richarlison can come straight in there and he is a player that you're not going to probably drop your level. He is a ready-made player. What is he, 25, 26? He is, he's just gone to the World Cup and been a terrific number 9 there for Brazil. Those are the kind of players Conte loves. Of course he does. Players that he knows he can trust fully, doesn't have to really tweak too much with. He can just put them out there, tell them what to do, and they'll go and do it. Which, again, I've said this before, I find so strange because Conte is such a good coach. Everyone, honestly, people rave about his coaching methods and everything as well. And he does improve players. Like I say about Heung-min and Bentancur, I do think that they've got a whole new side to their game since working with Conte. But yeah, and obviously Kulusevski has come on leaps and bounds as well as a player. He's just an incredible player. And I even think Eric Dyer, but for the kind of the rush of games, I felt that Conte had got a consistent Eric Dyer as well. But yeah, there was just something about non-ready-made players that it's almost like, so it looks at it like, that's not my responsibility. I mean, he doesn't want to give the board the impression that they can give him players like that because, this is the board that gave him Jed Spence, who, was signed by Fabio Paratici and the scouting department because they felt he would tick every box to be a Conte wing-back. But he didn't tick the box of being, maybe over 25 and being absolutely ready for Antonio Conte. And this is why Jed Spence, 22-year-old, on Boxing Day, found himself trudging along with Alfie Devine, 18-year-old, Brandon Austin, the third goalkeeper, as they used to be called the 18th man. Was it 18th man? 17th man? I can't remember what it was now. Well, we now have so many substitutes, it's not really that role anymore. Essentially, they're the young players that go along with the squad, almost like mascots, but purely are there for the fact that if there was an emergency, an injury or an illness, they would suddenly come into the squad. They could be drafted in as a late replacement. That's what it's come to for Jed Spence. Look, he did have a fever earlier in the week, as did Sonny and Skippy, all the wise. But obviously, Sonny started. Skippy was in the team, on the bench. But Spence was clearly well enough to travel with the team or the squad, but not enough to be involved on that bench. And the reason I bring up Jed Spence is because when you look at a game changer, yes, he's a wing back, but like I say, Matt Doherty wasn't particularly flying yesterday. He wasn't. It's an irony, I think, the fact that in all the friendlies he was playing on the left and scored 4 goals in the 3. Maybe it's actually his best position. We just didn't really realise. But yeah, back on the right, and he wasn't doing too much. But you could, in that game, add a thrust down that right-hand side by sticking Jed Spence in there. I do think that's a change that maybe could have been made, because even Conte looked at Doherty yesterday and thought, I'm not bringing Emerson on. It's not bringing Emerson on, which is rare. But he clearly thought Emerson's not going to provide more from an attacking point of view as we tried to win this game. But I think Jed Spence could have. And, if I'm Jed Spence, this is not what I would have envisaged. When I'm sat there back in the summer, you've got Spurs interested in you in what would eventually be a £20 million or worth 20 million eventually for Middlesbrough, it could be. And you've got the likes of Borussia Dortmund, Roma, Newcastle, Brentford, Nottingham Forest, all interested in potentially signing you. But you think, no, Spurs, that would be a great fit for me. I just wonder what he thinks now. He'll look at, let's say, Jude Bellingham, what Jude Bellingham did at the World Cup and became a star. He was already an incredible player, and he's only 19. But obviously at that World Cup, he really announced himself on the world stage. And obviously, Jude Bellingham has done that at Dortmund. Obviously gone from Birmingham, a team not in the Premier League, and he's gone to Dortmund, and he's gone to a club with a very clear pathway where they will use these young players, develop them in the first team, and they're a top team, a Champions League team. I think Conte would like us all to believe that you can only be a top team with top ready-made players, and I don't think that is actually the case. I think we see it everywhere. I think he'll look at Bellingham and think, maybe had I gone to, let's say, a Dortmund, would I now be, would I, maybe have been even pushing my claims to get in that World Cup squad as a kind of late potential. But as it is, he's at Tottenham Hotspur and he's walking around with a couple of academy players. That's not to disrespect them because they're both very talented, Brandon Austin and Alfie Devine. But he is walking around with kind of players that aren't there to be in the squad. And when you're a 20 million summer signing, that's rubbish. And it is. I said this before. Conte is not the manager for a club that has a pathway for younger players. He's just not. He's not. I'm sure if you sat down with him, he'd tell you about various young players that have done very well under him. I'm sure there are examples. Ryan Sessegnon, obviously, I think, had kind of found more consistency last season and at times this season as well. So, yeah, he's 22, so he's brought him on. Skippy was starting to really come along last season as well before his injury. But on the whole, I don't think it's something you can label of him. I said before, in his mind, it's a job of the academy staff to develop young players to his required standard, not his job to develop them. Which is strange because when I spoke to him about Skippy last year, he said, if he works with me, I can improve this. I can make him a top player. So it really is at odds. At one moment, he essentially doesn't feel it's his job to develop these players. But on the other, when you actually talk to him about them, he identifies ways that he can work with them and improve them. Maybe he's just an impatient man. Maybe he just doesn't feel he has the time to do that. But what I think annoys me about it all, and this is when I go back to that original video I did way back when the talks failed. I'm trying to remember whether I said it in that or whether I said it when he actually signed. But you know what you're hiring when you know who you're hiring when you're Tottenham Hotspur and you hire Antonio Conte. He has a glittering CV. He is a winner. Like I say, he is a brilliant coach and he will take teams to silverware. That's what he does. And the moment they hired him, they raised the expectations off the pitch, with the fans, with the players, with everyone behind the scenes in the staff, in the club. He is a Premier League winner, a multiple Serie A winner. He knows what it takes to win. But they were also hiring a manager who did not fit the DNA, because whether you think it's a good thing or not, the DNA of Tottenham that Daniel Levy has, trumpeted loudly before Nuno was appointed about, developing young players. And I guess you could also say entertaining football, although I still maintain that when the Conte system works, it does produce entertaining football. It's just the system's got to work. So he doesn't fit that. And I think at the moment what doesn't help Conte in that regard is that you have a team down the road in Arsenal who are showing that with young players playing a very nice style of football, they're top of the league. They're ahead of Spurs by, where is it? I've got it here. Is it 7 points? It is 10 points at the moment. 10 points with a game in hand. And that is with a squad of players that are not, experienced journeymen. They're not people in their late 20s. There's a lot of young players in there. The Sakas, your Odegaards, and Nketiah as well, obviously scoring yesterday. Oh my goodness, it's gone out of my head. Saliba, that's the name I was looking for as well. Some of their real key players out there are young players. So when Conte comes out with stuff saying, essentially that it's a certain type of player that Tottenham look for, and don't get me wrong, I do think it's ridiculous, and we're going to come to that in a moment. But Arsenal are going to be there for the Spurs board to look at and say, well, it's kind of what Pochettino was trying to do. He had a younger core of players, and obviously it didn't get to the top of the league, but it can kind of be done. And I do think that's going to be the big split, and I don't think that's helping Conte. But I still go back to that. None of that really matters, because when you hire Antonio Conte, you hire a certain type of manager. You can't... It's like a square peg in a round hole, isn't it? You can't try and squeeze that Antonio Conte-sized peg into the Tottenham hole. Essentially, you either have to cut that hole, make it the size of a square, or you just rip it up and buy a new... Okay, you can buy a new hole, you know what I mean. Because he works in a certain way. He needs a certain kind of squad, and that's what he does. So you don't sign him and think, oh, we'll change him. That's not how it works. You have to mould your club to fit him. You have to essentially throw away your beliefs. You have to throw away this DNA that they come out with, and you have to provide an Antonio Conte Tottenham Hotspur for him to work with. And that costs money. And, Conte will point out, and quite rightly, as I think he did in those quotes earlier, he will look down at the likes of Man United, Chelsea, Liverpool sitting below them, and he'll go, well, they're not just going to develop young players and help them eventually reach up to us. Look, all of them do have young players that are developed, so that's not quite correct. But they are going to throw money at the situation. We've seen Chelsea are lining up deals galore for the January transfer window. Liverpool obviously have moved for Cody Gakpo now. So, they've got him coming in as well. Man United, they're going to spend money. They need a Ronaldo replacement as well. Erik ten Hag's very publicly said that they want a new striker. They're not going to sit still. So any belief that Spurs can maybe coast through the second half of the season and hope to cling on to a top four place, it's not going to happen. And this is why, Spurs, they can't dither. They can't rely on the squad Conte already has. Despite the fact that, how publicly he speaks, we know Conte is desperate for new faces. He wants new players. Before the World Cup, he very clearly said, we need good players to come in the January transfer window. He said, you can go back and find the quotes, they're there. Whatever he says now, it hasn't changed that. But it's quite interesting, obviously, when you fast forward to the pre-match press conference quotes that I saw. I'll read them out. What do I want the club... Because he was asked, what do you want the club to do in the January transfer window? To which he said, what do I want the club to do? I think it's not right to say this. I think that in every club, there is the head coach and sporting director and the owner to try to speak about the situation. I can give advice to my club, the way to try to improve the team and to improve the quality in the squad, especially because after 5 months, the situation has changed from the start of the season. I think if there is the opportunity to strengthen the squad, we will do something. You know what is our policy. You know very well what is our policy. We will try to follow this policy and to improve the team. If there is a possibility to strengthen the squad, we will do it. Otherwise, we will continue with these players and I'm happy with them. And obviously he was pressed on, what do you mean by the club's policy? And he said, you know about the signings, signing players, about young players, about players with not big salaries. And this, we have to sign players that they have to stay in our vision, in the vision of the club. Honestly, that hour in our vision was doing a lot of heavy lifting there, because it's not Conte's vision to sign young players on low wages. Absolutely nowhere near his vision. He's a guy that works at the other end of the scale. And this is why, for me, to use another festive analogy, it's like, in Elf, when Buddy is testing all the Jack-in-the-Boxes, and he's like, and he's like waiting because he knows, and he thinks it hasn't happened, and then suddenly the Jack-in-the-Box jumps up. That's what it's like watching Antonio Conte and Tottenham, knowing that at some point it's all going to go in your face. It just will. Look at it on paper, and it's a partnership that makes no sense. A club that doesn't seem to be willing to change and start doing big club things in terms of the transfer market. It's almost like they're trying to operate in the Borussia Dortmund model, but without coaches that work in the Borussia Dortmund model. It's almost like that's the way they're going. I think they had that in Poch, perhaps. And I always get some people in the comments that go, stop talking about Poch. But I'm talking about in terms of that model. There's different ones. And I love Antonio Conte. Honestly, that sounded a bit weird, but you know what I mean. I do. I think he's a really fascinating guy, a brilliant coach. And I think he could win things with Spurs if he's given an Antonio Conte Spurs. But if you're trying to follow a model that is like Dortmund's, you need to bring in a coach who very much wants to work with young players, develop them and create a very tight-knit squad that can, I guess, punch above its weight, improve players, make them into stars. And that's not what Conte does. He works with stars. That's not to say he can't make stars, because he can. But on paper, it makes no sense. And I do wonder whether the fact that there's no real alternative for Conte right now out there at other clubs, whether he is a little bit more content to go along with things to a degree. I don't think massively. I don't think he's going to put up with too much kind of what he would see as kind of messing around and doing things with half measures. But look, he is happy at the club. But I would imagine he probably sees right now a ceiling to what he can do compared to the clubs he's been at in the past. And it's so difficult to watch because it kind of feels like, I really hope it's not, but it feels like a situation where, like I say, you can see someone slowly doing and eventually it'll just be like, whoa, it's disaster. I think we're just drilled into us with Tottenham Hotspur that that's going to be what's going to happen. I just honestly look. It's the thing. I think the comments that have come out, and there was some more today, but they're very similar to the ones that he said pre-match. I can see people getting very angry about a transfer window that hasn't happened. I do think we still have to see, because like I said, the fees spent or not spent on Kulusevski and Bentancur last season, a year ago, were, you would probably criticise if you talked about spending whatever it was, 16 million up front or so on two players in this window. They ended up being season-changing signings. So it can be done. My big worry is if Conte is talking about, where's the line? Where we are. Signing players, young players, players with not big salaries. My biggest problem with that is young players with not big salaries are the kind of players that Conte doesn't play. So what's the point in signing them? Brian Hill sitting there doing nothing. Jed Spence sitting there doing nothing. Pape Matar sitting there doing nothing. Poor old Harvey White. Harvey White is honestly, he might as well help Steve Jukes, a kit man. Honestly, he might as well. And that's not to be disrespectful, because Harvey White is a terrific young player. He's really, really good. And he showed in the friendlies how versatile he is playing as a false nine. But there is barely a point to him being in Conte's bench, because he is yet to play a single competitive minute for Antonio Conte. Honestly, he gets praise from Conte, but it means nothing. So this kind of Conte saying that the policy to sign young players on low wages, it's almost like just throwing more players in there that we can all talk about how good they'll be at other clubs eventually. I don't understand the logic of it. I don't. But we'll see. We see where this January transfer window goes. Again, this could be a Machiavellian move. It could be Conte saying things that he knows will irritate the fans and will shine a spotlight on what Spurs do next month. It could be a little bit of a way of triggering them into doing something. I can only keep saying that the stadium was meant to be a game changer. This is what Spurs have said. I think Daniel Levy may have even said it in quotes at some point. It is a cash-generating machine. For everything people moan about the stadium and the NFL are there now, or the rugby's there, or they've got boxing, or they've got concerts, events, whatever. That is because it is churning. Honestly, it is churning pound notes out of it. That now has to be starting to be kicking in as a way, and in using that money as well. And there's still this 50 million, the remainder of the 150 million that ENIC made available in was it Capital? In Capital, yeah. And judging on the previous thing, that said that could be drawn out in tranches until the end of the year. I need to clarify whether that means financial year or year, but the fact they didn't say financial year makes me wonder whether there's only 4 days left for that to be taken out. They need to do something. If they don't bring in a couple of good players that Conte is happy with and will use, they will not finish top 4. It's as simple as that. I don't think they'll finish top 4 with the squad they currently have. Especially with the way that Conte is using it. There's a part of me that thinks, if you played Jed Spence and at this point in the season he was getting minutes and he was now in a rhythm and he was really adapted to the Premier League, I think the Conte system would be working much better, and I think you'd be getting lots of goals, and I think they'd be at the other end of the pitch rather than having to worry about what's happening in defence. But I am not a multiple title winning manager, head coach like Antonio Conte is, so I know nothing compared to him. But yeah, so in this situation, you have to sign at least a couple of players, and that is the plan, from what I'm told. But if they end up cutting corners and they are players that Conte's not going to use, what's the point? And I cannot keep going back to this point enough. Don't hire Antonio Conte if you don't want to make your club fit him. He is not a manager who fits to a club. He is a manager who has a very set way of doing things, and it would be foolish to hire a manager like that and then give him the old style Tottenham Hotspur, because it will not work. I mean, they might look at it and say, well, we got the Champions League. That was exactly what we wanted. Conte wants more than that. He wants more than top 4. He wants to believe he can compete for the title. And it's all about patience, about the time frame and the way they're going. If they give him another couple of young players that he might not use in the January transfer window, what's the incentive for him to stay in the summer? Because it's not going to be any different. They need to... That's what Pochettino said in the past. Sorry to use him again. They need to act like a big club. I mean, Kulusevski said it in the interview after the game. They can't have ambitions of being a big club if they play like that. And the same goes to the board of Tottenham Hotspur. They can't have ambitions to be a big club if they're not going to act like one off the pitch. They need to make a move. Liverpool have gone in for Gapco. It's not the biggest fee in the world either. It's something like under 40 million euros or something. We're not talking about an extortionate amount. And yeah, he is a young player, so you might argue would Conte play him. But certainly with attacking options, he needs more attacking options. The likes of Hill and Tanganga, they need to go out on loan and go and play. He needs to have players there that he will bring off that bench. He needs to have a bench that he will look at and see as well stocked and able to game change throughout. Look, don't get me wrong, Conte is not blameless in all of this whatsoever. He can be quite stubborn with his tactics. He can be quite stubborn with his team selection. All managers are like that. He's no different. And I don't think he's blameless whatsoever. I don't think the players there are currently blameless whatsoever either. And certainly the board are not blameless either. There is a combination, but ultimately when you've got a transfer window, you've got to act like a big club. I don't want to get to the end of the January transfer window and moaning about what might have been and what could have been. They do need another defender. If he's not going to play Jed Spence, then they need another right wing back. And he needs a creative midfielder that I believe that could play either in a deeper role or can play up front as a more kind of attacking force. But yeah, please don't throw it all away, Tottenham. Honestly, stick to your convictions in terms of You're gonna if you change the philosophy of what you're doing and start hiring the managers like Mourinho and Conte who have a certain style, back them, back those managers. Don't just try to plod on in your very set kind of jello mold of how you need things to be, because you've got the wrong mold with the wrong jello, the American audience. Yeah, there you go. Starting to get a bit annoyed there. That wasn't meant to be kind of how the video was going to go, but I just honestly, I find it absolutely mad, and I can't see how you can operate like that. Look, it's all very premature, and like I've said, I've got to kind of listen to my own advice, and this transfer window could be very different. But I think Conte's quotes obviously were setting you up for something, and hopefully that is something that triggers the club as well. And yeah, it can't be that way. It cannot be that way. You can't plod along in the same old way and hope that it keeps working, because it hasn't for 20 years now. It hasn't produced titles and silverware. It hasn't. It's produced one League Cup. So yes, for everything that's done well off the pitch, it's on the pitch that really matters to the fans, and that's where things have got to change. So there you go. Right, I'm going to head off now. Probably, unless there's anything big drops in the next couple of days, I guess those financial results may finally, although that's awkward now when they come out, and whether the fans really know exactly what's there to spend, that could change things as well. Maybe if they drop, I might do a little extra video before New Year. But if not, obviously have a very happy New Year. And we've got Villa on New Year's Day at the Spurs Stadium. And I shall talk about that as soon as I can in the days afterwards. So yeah, I'm going to head off now. I'll go and calm myself down a bit. I was getting a little bit wound up towards the end there. It's because when you see something happening and you can see there's no real logic to it, it does become very frustrating. I guess that's life with Tottenham Hotspur anyway. But there you go. Right, I'm going to head off. As always, stay safe, stay healthy, look after yourselves. I shall catch you later. Goodbye.